And now, here to induct the legendary Stu Hart is a man who, during our Kiss My Foot match back in 1993, showed me the new meaning of the term open mouth insert foot. I'll never forget that match. Not only did I have to kiss his foot, he somehow stuck my own foot in my mouth. But after that, it followed that I wound up on the wrong end of a lot of sharpshooters. Fortunately for me, he let me go, but I don't think he's going to be that kind to Mr. McMahon tomorrow night at WrestleMania. Ladies and gentlemen, the best there is, the best there was, the best there'll ever be, Bret the Hitman Hart and the entire Hart family. Thank you.
Well, I can't tell you how much of an honor it is for all of us to be here tonight and pay tribute to my dad, especially for what he contributed to the wrestling business. The wrestling industry is what I like to think of it. You know, I don't even know where to start, and I don't really have enough time, but I know, unlike all the rest of the Hearts, we could probably talk about my dad for about 5-6 hours straight. But my father, he was a great wrestling promoter, and I think he was loved almost as much by the wrestlers as he was by his own family. And like they said earlier in the clip, you know, he was as good as his word, and he was one of those kind of promoters that it was all a matter of a handshake and his word, and you could go on that, and that's a special thing. And I don't think that, you know, I just know that all the wrestlers out there, and there's even so many in the back here that worked for my father, how much you appreciate a fact when you meet someone that's good for his word. And my father was always good for me. The man I still long to be is the one I first thought my father was. You know, he was he brought all of us Hearts into this crazy mixed up world of wrestling, and I think from the time that I was in diapers, there was wrestlers running around the yard, wrestlers screaming in the basement, there was bears under the porch. I mean, it was just, I can't tell you what kind of a circus it was, but I know that we all loved it, and we all miss it. All the lunacy was half the beauty of the wrestling profession. You know, it was, there was so many things about it, and I know that I've only got a few minutes here, but I come to think of a couple of different stories. I remember when I was a kid, and I thought it was about 12:30, 1 o'clock at night on a school night, and my father used to have all these Cadillacs and big cars parked around the yard that he used to use for the road trips with the wrestlers, and one of the cars he had, I saw it stuck at the front gates of the house. And I remember a couple of my brothers and I got up and looked out the big window. And I knew it was one of my dad's cars, and I just figured that one of my brothers or somebody had got stuck in it. And I could see that someone was spinning the tires, and they were stuck right at the gate. And I had to go to school in the morning, so I sort of drifted back off to my bed. But in the Hart house, the boys never slept. And a few minutes later, I actually remember looking out the window and seeing my dad going down the front driveway to see who is stuck in the driveway. And I just assumed it was maybe Smith back behind me here. But as it turned out, it was some kid that had walked up the highway, and he had tried to steal one of the cars, and luckily found one of the Cadillacs. It was quite easy to steal because they had the keys in it. And my dad did think it was Smith and went down there to help Smith out with the car, and instead he found some kid sitting in the driver's seat gunning it and trying to get away. And I just remember my dad dragging this guy up the snowbank, and like I said, I assumed it was Smith this whole time. And then I remember in the kitchen, not too long after that, all the pots and pans banging around, and my dad was stretching this guy right in the kitchen. And I remember hearing him making all this noise and groaning and yelling and all that stuff, and I remember it was me and all my brothers were all at the top of the stairs, and we were listening downstairs, and I remember my mom was there. And we did a quick count, and it was like Smith, Brewski. And we realized that all the boys were accounted for, couldn't be one of us. And anyway, my dad stretched this guy for about 3-4 hours in the kitchen. And in telling that story about my dad, it's the beauty of my father was that most people would have just phoned the police and had the guy arrested. But my dad didn't believe in that kind. He always believed in a second chance. And my dad ended up stretching this guy for hours, and instead of phoning the police, he called his parents and had his parents come and get him. And then he got him a job at the wrestling matches where he was an usher. And I just remember when I think of my father, I always think that, he did more good with those kind of things than, anybody could phone the police. But he gave this kid a fresh chance and a new start. And for years I would see him at the wrestling matches, and I would always think, it's amazing how quick things can change. My dad's good fortune changed this guy's life and put him on a different track. And I think that plays for a lot of wrestlers that are out there. So many wrestlers that started for my father in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and back here talking to Dick Byers and Mad Dog Vachon and some of these guys. Iron Sheik got his start up in Calgary, and who could forget Jim the Anvil Neidhart got his start up in Calgary. I would say 75% of the wrestlers that worked through the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s got their start up in Calgary, and that's a great accomplishment and a great achievement. My father had a wonderful sense of humor, and I wanted to sort of try to tell you a story, because my dad had a sense of humor much like my brother Owen, and he was... Owen got all his sense of humor and his ribbing. I think he learned all that from my dad. And I know back in the 50s they used to have, my dad was famous for what they called these Mabel parties. And they'd get wrestlers up there. And then one year they had Antonio the Great up there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Antonio the Great, but he's about a 500-pound blob that you wouldn't miss if he was walking down the street. And he had 2 teeth and a chain and a bus behind him. But anyway, he had come up to Calgary, and they gave him the white hat and the special ceremony and all that. And then the rib went out that everyone was going to rib Antonio, and they started ribbing about this girl, supposed girl named Mabel, and that there was going to be a party at her house. And she had a crush on him and kind of liked him a lot. And the rib would last for a couple of weeks, and sometimes they would try to kayfabe him on the ribs and make out like he was not going to be part of it, but he kind of figured that, he could get in on the party, and finally they kind of let him in, and they went out to Mabel's house, and when her husband was out of town supposedly, and to have a good party, and the wrestlers, my dad and a couple of them would be in there, and they'd all go to the party. It would seem like a pretty good party at first, and I think they even had Mabel or a girl there playing Mabel. But out of nowhere, someone, I think it was one of the wrestlers' brothers, would come kicking in the front door with a shotgun and say something about who's with my wife or something like that, and he would shoot a blank, and one of the wrestlers would get the ketchup and smack it on his chest and fall back, and tell Antonio to run, run. And he'd run out the front door and just keep running. And if you know what Canada's like, there's a long way to go. And as the story I remember is that he ran so far and ripped up his trousers and his pants. He had that same white hat. And he finally located the police, or the RCMP, and the RCMP, so he said there was a murder and someone had been shot. And they, of course, came out, and when they got there to the house that this all supposedly happened, all the wrestlers were sitting inside having beer and laughing about what a great rib it was. And poor Antonio would be sitting in the back seat of the police car while the police are in having a few beers with my dad and the other wrestlers. And he'd be crying, but anyway, I thought I would tell you that kind of a funny story, because my dad, you know, everyone thinks of him as a big, tough, mean wrestler, but the truth is he had a heart as big as this room, and he always had a strong affection for wrestlers in general, and right to the very end, even the young wrestlers that started out always had a roof over their head and a meal when they stayed at my father's house. And, you know, all I can say about my dad is that, you know, we all loved him, we all miss him. I don't think the wrestling business will ever be the same without him. And, you know, the Stampede Wrestling in the Calgary territory, you had to see it to believe it and appreciate it. It was just the craziest place in the world, and it was, I think we delivered some of the greatest wrestling the world's ever seen up there, and some of the greatest stars that the wrestling world's ever seen came right out of Calgary. And I'm really proud of that. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that could talk on and on about my father. But all I want to say last in closing is the hard ages last. And my father will live on forever, especially now that he's in the WWE Hall of Fame. Thank you very much.